Of all the art forms to ever spring from the minds of man, there has never been a better vehicle for flights of fantasy than animation. For what is animation if not magic itself? Dead matter imbued with vivid life. Whole worlds that never were, wrought from pulped wood and baked silicone, rough clay and soft felt. It is raw imagination made manifest. So it has been since the very first cartoon was animated, Émile Cohl's Phantasmagorie. In English, simply a fantasy. 700 frames of goofy little stick guys turning stuff into other stuff, bookended by shots of the animator's hands intended to break down the barrier between that painted world and our own. When Tolkien ushered in the age of high fantasy some 30 years later, it was only a matter of time until someone animated that. Indeed, Walt Disney himself considered adapting The Hobbit or bringing aspects of it into Fantasia just a year after its release, and over the following decades, a few other legendary animators, mostly Japanese, would take their own cracks at the material. But of course, many more took less direct inspiration from the works of Tolkien and Lewis and Le Guin, not to mention Baum, Burroughs, and Carroll before them. The gritty, sexy, wondrous worlds of 80s pulp fantasy in particular found themselves as at home in cell vinyl as they were on vinyl album covers. And as Japan cemented its place as the global capital of this entire medium, many such worlds would flicker into being across their airwaves and find more permanent purchase on their video rental shelves, in a time and place that would eventually come to be whispered of by otaku the world over as the peak of Western fantasy within the medium as a whole. Was it actually, though? Or are the best times still ahead of fantasy anime fanatics? Could we even perhaps be living through them right now? Yes! Sure, the analog aesthetic of retro anime is a bit better suited to the earthy, natural vibe you want out of high fantasy than modern digital animation. There's a reason studios have started to emulate that look in their fantasy works, and indie teams are even bringing the original techniques back. Go watch Dungeons and Television. It's free on YouTube, and it deserves a cajillion views. But aesthetics aside, the actual animation is more magical than ever. We've got Evan Call, Kevin Penkin, composers from Dark Souls and Chrono Trigger making the music. The writing and world building is built on all the successes and failures of those supposedly golden olden days, and there's just so much of the good stuff to go around, not to mention all the isekai, though I understand for some people that is a huge knock against the current era. But I'll get into my own thoughts on that and the other fantasy anime that define this current period of plenty after a word from our sponsor. When you want to live out your own high fantasy adventure, a good gaming computer is your doorway to other worlds. And when you order from Starforge Systems, that door comes with a gorgeous window built in. Whatever fantasy aesthetic you like, they have a collab PC for that. Looking for some chillaxin' Shire vibes? Try their Freerun rig. Something more ethereal? Look at their other Freerun rig, or the Hell's Paradise one. Not enough whimsy for you? Check out their Terraria PC. In the mood for a dank old dungeon delve? They've got that in solo leveling, Path of Exile, and old school RuneScape flavors. Heck, why not? You can even deck out your PC in stained glass. Most recently, they partnered up with the Apothecary Diaries to transform a monster gaming rig into a serene inner palace pagoda, which has got to be one of my top 2 favorite designs they've ever done. But regardless of what you prefer, all of them can be further customized with your choice of plate lights plus matching desk mats and wall art to tie your whole anime and or gaming room together around that new gorgeous centerpiece. By all accounts, they play as good as they look, too, and I am itching to get back to Japan so I can find out firsthand with the Chainsaw Man PC that arrived literally 2 days after I left for Canada. But you don't have to wait. Just click the link in the doobly-doo to get the sexiest computer you will ever own today. The first question you gotta answer when assessing the state of fantasy anime is, should we count isekai? And personally, I don't see much reason not to. to. Traveling from one world to another is just another narrative hook after all, albeit a very versatile and overused one. But for those who do believe the golden age of fantasy anime to be long bygone, the most common complaint tends to be they used to make real fantasy anime, not all this isekai crap. So clearly, it's not that cut and dry for everyone. And I don't think the old heads are only discounting it because their humble collection of classics like Escaflowne, Ray Earth, Dunbine, 12 Kingdoms, Fushigi Yugi, El Hazard, Familiar of Zero, Inuyasha, Mar, and Monster Rancher gets just absolutely mogged by all the great modern isekai. It's just not the vibe for some folks. Directly connecting your fantasy setting to the real world does highlight the unreality of the imagined one in ways that can be detrimental to the escapist immersion that we come to fantasy for. That doesn't bother me, obviously. I love isekai in general, but I don't think I'll be making any iseconverts with this video because it is, at the end of the day, just a vibes-based argument one way or another. Luckily, though, I don't have to, because back in the good old days, there just weren't that many fantasy anime, period, let alone good ones or even finished ones if we're talking OVAs. I mean, sure, over the years they got The Slayers, Berserk, Nadia, Secret of Blue Water, Vampire Hunter D, Dragon Quest Dino Daiboken, Dragon Half, Dragon Pink, Popolo Croix, Sorceress Stabber Orphan, Mahojin Guru Guru, Royal Space Force, all them classic Ghiblis, Scrapped Princess, FMA03, Claymore, and some other post-2000 stuff, depending when exactly you stop counting. But today, we've got Frieren, Witch Hat Atelier, Wistoria, Wand and Sword, Sentenced to be a Hero, Gachiakuta, Dorohedoro, Clevitas, Leviathan, Seventh Prince, Demons of the Shadow Realm, From Old Country Bumpkin to Master Swordsman, Two Perfect Saint, Agents of the Four Seasons, The Daughter of the Demon Lord is Too Kind, 'Tis Time for Torture Princess, The Warrior Princess and Barbaric King, Champignon Witch, Secrets of the Silent Witch, Once Upon a Witch's Death, The Invisible Man and His Soon-to-Be Wife, Pass the Monster Meat Milady, and probably some other good stuff I'm forgetting, because all that is just the better than decent non-isekais without any explicit game mechanics from the last year. If we go back to just when I started my channel a decade ago, not even the start of the isekai boom, the top tier highlights alone outnumber the retro fantasies that are even watchable. I mean, back then the pickings were so slim, Record of Lodos War is considered an all-timer, and I mean, sure, it's got the vibe, it's got Best Elf, it drops a dungeon and a dragon in episode 1. The assignment was clearly understood. But as for the quality of the dungeons, they barely touched Don Machi, let alone Don Meshi, and the stories, like your average D&D campaign podcast, but anime. The original novels sold mainly on the novelty of being Japan's first high-profile tabletop RPG replay series, and the anime's acclaim, I think, comes mainly from being darn near the only thing that took a serious attempt at scratching that particular epic high fantasy itch so directly when it came out. Berserk was a little too scary, Slayers was too funny, Dino Daiboken was... Actually, that one's pretty good too. But now we've got ReZero, Bookworm, and Mushoku Tensei, and if you don't like isekai, cool, check out Clevitas with its 3 men and a baby take on the Ringbearer quest, or Ranking of Kings with its deceptively whimsical, politically fraught world, or Frieren with its everything. We've got more flavors of racially diverse fairy tale world than we know what to do with these days. And that's not even getting into fairy tale, which we won't be doing. I'm not personally a huge fan, but vibes aside, I do think Mashima's writing is around the same level as Lodos, if not a little tighter, and that's kind of my point. The old school high watermark for traditional fantasy anime goodness, at least among old heads who don't know Dino Daiboken 91, is par for the course in the so-called isekai era. If you want an action-adventure romp with that classic swords and sorcery, Dungeons and Dragons aesthetic, you are spoiled for choice. And if you're open to more exotic vibes, you've got Magi, Yona of the Dawn, the heroic legend of Arslan, FMA Brotherhood, a much more comprehensive adaptation of Hunter x Hunter than the 90s one, and of course, the most sprawling fantasy epic of any medium or era, One Piece. piece. Though, of course, then we do start getting into where the line is between fantasy and magical girl shonen battle type dealies, because most of them do fit into the broadest definition of fantasy, particularly urban fantasy, but they're not necessarily what you picture when some guy says, I want to watch a fantasy anime. You recommend Sailor Moon or Yu Yu Hakusho to that guy, it feels like sticking a square peg in a round hole. But then, say, Cardcaptor Sakura or Dragon Ball, those are a little more squirkly, and Ray Earth and Claymore are straight up perfect spheres. It's another vibe check at the end of the day. Everyone's gonna draw their line somewhere a little different, but I do think there's gotta be a line somewhere, because a maximalist definition would include My Hero Academia, and ain't no one who's craving a spot of Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings sitting down for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or WandaVision. We could get into a whole Calvin's dad conversation about what urban fantasy is Percy Jackson and what's Sky High, but you kind of just know it when you see it, and even when it comes to the most fantastical of shonen adventures, I do think most people are seeing something a little different there. When folks talk about the modern fantasy anime resurgence, One Piece is almost never in that conversation, and despite being the big three anime, it's never really been a contender for the fantasy big three. Not that there's any real debate as to what those are. I don't even have to tell you what anime I'm talking about. They're the reason we're having this conversation right now, and not just in the sense that I waited for all of them to be out so that I'd have enough footage for the video. Yes, anime studios are making the most fantasy stuff they've ever made right now, and not just because they're making more anime in general. It made up 46% of all the anime released in 2024, 29% if you don't count isekai, and even with the market getting a wee bit oversaturated, it is still the most in-demand genre of anime. In objective, purely economic terms, this is the golden age. But regardless of what the numbers say, you're not going to agree with that unless it feels like a golden age to you. And that feeling is only going to come from having a seemingly endless supply of new top-tier shit to watch. In objective, purely economic terms, the golden age of Shonen Jump, the period when the magazine saw its fastest growth and its position atop the manga market was untouchable, stretched from 1980 to 1996, the start of Dr. Slump to the end of Slam Dunk. Once Toriyama and Inoue bowed out, circulation plummeted almost immediately, and while One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach did slow the bleeding, they couldn't stop it, let alone reverse it. But if you ask the average millennial or Gen Z shonen head outside of Latin America what the golden age of Jump was, he'll almost certainly say the Big Three era, because the impact of those three anime hitting Western TV back to, oh no, 4Kids, permanently changed his brain chemistry. Naruto and or Bleach gave him and all his friends their first taste of shonen, and once they started craving a second hit, Bleach and or Naruto were right there waiting for them, alongside Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Hitman Reborn, Death Note, and of course the older but still new to them stuff like Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho. As they got more hardcore about it, fan subs of those series and One Piece were waiting to suck them even deeper in, and no matter how deep they went, it always felt like the well of good shonen shit would never dry up. Each of those anime was great individually, but their proximity to each other elevated our perception of all of them, giving Jump's Silver Age the shine of a golden one in the West. And these anime are putting a similar shine on the current moment for fantasy. It just happens to actually line up with the numbers this time. Though, if you do actually look at those numbers, it is kind of interesting that we ended up focusing on this specific trio. Solo Leveling is one of the hottest properties, not just in fantasy, but all of anime right now, yet very few people would argue it belongs in the big three. And despite garnering nearly equal success to and way more critical acclaim than the big one of webtoons, the same goes for ReZero. Made in Abyss is an Anime of the Year winner, with a sequel coming this year that's also just not part of this conversation for some reason. So we're clearly not just selecting for the biggest audiences or the best produced adaptations here. In fact, Delicious in Dungeon barely cleared the top 20 most watched shows in the year that it released, so audience size doesn't seem to matter that much at all. What then is the unifying element of this big three? I don't want to just say vibes again, but I do kind of think it's vibes. They all hit a similar sweet spot with their stories and world building, interrogating and reinterpreting the tropes established by fantasy anime's foundational influences without fully deconstructing or subverting them. In a sea of sword and sorcery satire, video game-infused isekai, and edgy dark fantasy, these shows crucially lack the irony, self-indulgent cynicism, and more horrific undertones that can undermine the cozy, familiar, Tolkien-esque atmosphere that we fantasy fans all still crave deep down. Well, in Witch Hat Atelier's case, it's more Le Guin-esque, but close enough. And that's precisely it. They're all exactly close enough. They give you the wizards and the warriors, the dungeons and the dragons, the elves and the dwarves, the quiet pastoral landscapes and the breathtaking magical vistas, all that good stuff that's captured our collective imaginations for the better part of a century since The Hobbit dropped, but without the staleness that comes from just doing a Lord of the Rings again, or Dragon Quest or Wizardry, or the overcorrections for that can lead to the high fantasy itch being left under-scratched by less orthodox works. At the same time, though, each of the big three scratches it in a meaningfully different way. Witch Hat Atelier is as epic as fantasy gets, inviting us to intimately and extensively explore its wondrous world as its heroes and villains grapple with questions and conflicts that could shake it to its very core. Frieren, in contrast, crafts a setting where such conflicts have mostly been settled. A space in which the elf and her friends can simply live their lives, which we get to observe in cozy little slices, interspersed with occasional shonen battle shenanigans as they meander through their kinda sorta quest. They're two stories of similar scale, but wildly different scope. Witch Hat using its characters as lenses to help us understand the intricacies of its world and politics through their different philosophies on magic and morality, while Frieren's world more often holds up a mirror to its characters and prompts them and us to reflect. Then Dungeon Meshi falls somewhere in the middle, a very personal character study that never loses sight of the broader ecosystem in which it exists, a focused quest with a singular goal broken up into bite-sized chunks of food porn gag manga. Heroes of fundamentally low ambition, concerned mainly with how to make it to their next meal, who end up chewing their way one bite at a time through the very foundations of their world. It offers a little bit of what folks like about both of the other three, plus its own distinct flavor, and most crucially, it does so in less than half the time, telling a story with the scale of one lone island, a single campaign module, yet a scope that encompasses everything. Each of the three anime complements the other two beautifully, and in doing so, they serve to collectively cultivate viewers who are fans of not just a single really good anime, but the whole genre, acting as better ambassadors for fantasy anime as a whole than Made in Abyss or Re:Zero or FMA or even Berserk ever could, because even though they all do very creative and worthwhile things with it, they're all built on the same classic foundation. They all scratch the fuck out of that itch, more so even than Lodos does. Come to think of it, That's a defining feature of Shonen's big three, too. Just replace Tolkien with Toriyama, and it also kind of explains the most glaring exclusions. Despite both selling better on a per-volume basis than Bleach, neither Death Note nor Hunter x Hunter has ever been seriously considered for the big three, even after the 2011 remake fixed Hunter x Hunter's Western visibility problem. And I think that's because neither one of them really feels representative of that core Dragon Ball-inspired shonen battle experience. Death Note rejects the action side of it, and Hunter x Hunter brutally deconstructs it. Shonen is a very broad category, so is fantasy for that matter, but when I say I want to watch a shonen anime or I feel like some fantasy, you know what I mean, and what I mean is something like the big three. That's why, even though this golden age has brought with it so much great isekai indulgence, lit RPG number crunching, romantasy feels, sword and sorcery swashbuckling, steampunk romanticism, urban fantasy thrills, and dark fantasy chills. Fuck, there's even a few good ones of those fucking things. These three have to be the big three. You know, my original intent when I started writing this video was to turn it into another Stealth ReZero glazing sesh and make the case that that should be one of the big four, but I think I just talked myself out of it and into the inescapable conclusion that big number 4 should in fact be interspecies reviewers. I'm Geoff Thew, professional man of culture, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk.